So I want to start with two ideas.
Yeah, I'm doing
Better is you plugged into something?
I'm sorry, I am plugged in.
Oh, that's good. No, it's fine. I just kicked it out of the wall. I put it back in. Also, so we've got word-word relations and word-world relations, right? Remember we talked about all this? And then I want to distinguish between the natural world and we can put all these things in scare quotes because God only knows what half of them mean. The natural world and the social world, they're just handy ways of thinking, even if eventually you're going to want to problematize all of them. And just an obvious example, sometimes we think in philosophy as if the natural world settles everything. Natural science settles everything, natural whatever settles everything. But just think about the following, which is an example I'm fond of. So if you want to find out what gold is, you might think that the right thing to do is go to the chemistry department. But imagine the following. It turns out that when you go to the chemistry department, they tell you that what we call gold is actually two quite different metals. And the way that we discovered that jade was two quite different minerals. And it turns out that all of one of them is in Fort Knox, and all of the other one, or all the stuff in Fort Knox is one of them, and all the stuff in the Kremlin is another one. Which do you think gold will turn out to be? Well, one thing I can guarantee you is it won't be the chemistry department that settles that question, right? So sometimes what happens is what goes on in the social world turns out to be to carry the big stick, not what goes on in the other world. And when we look at things that don't naturally reach out into the natural world at all, but look into the social world, like does anybody think, well, probably somebody does think this, but I'll give it as an example, that if we wanted to find out what a marriage is, we should look into the natural world to try to settle that question. I mean, where would we look, right? So that's one. And when we look at concepts, it's very important to think that we can be, when we look to ask, what love is, should we be looking here? 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 Should we be looking at all of them? Which would carry the weight? Where would the authority lie, even if we did think we should look in all of those places? That's a very important question. And to some degree, if you like, it's just the same question as what love is, but asked in a slightly different way. Right? Already, when you're thinking about what love is, you're going to have to settle that question or the other way around, right? You can't proceed on one front without proceeding on the other. So bound to be methodological questions that can turn out to be substantive as you try to press for a certain theory about love, or about anything, but love is the one we're focusing on. I want to now introduce another idea. So this is all still in the kind of methodological prologue stuff, but it's important to rehearse it and have these ideas in your mind. And the other thing is that we can ask about a concept. So concept now is just playing, a kind of neutral word. It's sort of what goes along with, when you know how to use a word correctly, right, prima facie, you possess the concept associated with that word. It's not supposed to be some magic new entity. It's just whatever it is, the capacity that you have to use the word correctly. It says you've got a grasp of the concept. But it's handy to talk about concepts now instead of words. So when we look at a concept, there are two questions we can ask about it that often aren't properly separated. So it's bad methodology not to separate them. One is, what is it? And this might be a definition. We might want to know what the definition of it is. That's just in the eyes of, but who cares? What's its definition? And that might lead us to ask, what's a definition? right? You can see where, and that itself is going to turn out to be a key kind of question. So for example, if you've looked at some of the quotes from what was her name? Blanking. Bert Brogard on romantic love, you see that one of the issues you're going to have is, should we be thinking of this, when we ask about what love is, should we be looking for a set of necessary and sufficient conditions? So A loves B if and only if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Natural philosophers naturally tend to gravitate towards that idea. Or should we be looking for a central case in a stereotypical consideration of the concept? So we should look, say, here's a primary occurrence, this is the center. Then there's a kind of sliding scale as you move out on a periphery. Things at the center are definitely love. As you move out, it's a little hazier, and we shouldn't be looking for necessary and sufficient conditions, but something else. If you've just been reading the philosophical investigations and you're kind of high on old Witt, you know, then you're probably likely to be thinking things like, oh, games, you know, like there's this web and family resemblances and stuff like that. You'll think, yeah, that's what we should be doing. But even that would be extremely difficult. For one of the questions that you might ask is one we brought up this time, right? Last time. Should we, when we think about the center or the periphery of love, should we, like Freud, look at sexual love as the center and the other things as periphery? Or should we look at other things as central and the sexual as periphery is going to be just about as deep as any of the other kinds of questions that you can ask about love, right? So even settling on centers and peripheries can turn out to already be to make a significant philosophical move in the game. It's not neutral, that's already weighted. But that's one of the questions we can ask, and that's the one you find Socrates endlessly going on about. To esti, to dikaion, right? What is that? What is that? What is that? And, you know, his interlocutors all seem to be ready to tell him, though they never get it right, poor things, but still, they're always ready to tell him. And, but there's a different question altogether, which is, what do we need with that concept? So this is something that's often neglected, but seems to me to be actually at the heart of a lot of philosophy. It's not answering the question over here, what is the definition of the concept? It's actually doing something else. It's doing this. I mean, sort of roughly, what would a good concept in that territory be? So it's thinking, we've got a concept. So here, let me give a very simple example of this. So we've got the concept of knowledge, and there are two questions we can ask about it. What is it? What is knowledge? And then the other is, what do we need a concept like that for? So I tell you what it is, and I'm going to pretend for a moment that it's justified true belief. And I say, well, that's what's for you. Think, well, what do we need that for? Would we be better off, for example, with the concept that simply left out justification altogether? Just true belief? Would that be enough? Right? And then there'd be an argument about not what the concept is, but what do limited, dependent, rational animals like us need in their conceptual repertoire to best deal with the world? That second question is, right, a very important question. Why? Well, look, who cares what the concept is, right? Why should we care about it if it's not the one that we want to do the relevant work? I mean, in science, we dump concepts all the time because they're no good, and we put in other ones in place. So, phlogiston got dumped. It wasn't what we wanted, didn't do the work, the explanatory work we wanted it to do. We replaced it with a different concept altogether. In other cases, we hold the concept, like with gravity, say, or mass. We hold it fixed, even though there's a massive amount of theory change associated with it, because that will better make for something else that's sometimes overlooked, the actual intellectual integrity of the subject of science itself. That we don't want it to be filled with these kind of cataclysmic breaks we want to show a kind of persistence and continuity, and we try in various ways to tell different conceptual stories to help us see its continuity. So notice that when we go to this one, here's a way we could be looking at it. So maybe our concept of love is this. It's wanting the good of the other person, and moreover, it's wanting to be the instrument of that good. So it's not just that you want the good of the others, because you might just a generally benevolent person might want the good of everyone, but not think that they could be the instrument of that good particularly. But in certain cases, they think, no, I want to be the one who brings the good to you, especially certain kinds of goods, right? I want you to get them from me, right? That's the opposite. Let's suppose that's right. Let's suppose that that's what love is. That's what our concept of love is. And we all agree, right? We do the backwards and forwards, we do all the kind of Rawlsian reflective equilibrium stuff, and it always passes the test, and so we say, that's what love is. That's what our concept of love is. And now someone says, yeah, but love is kind of an ideal of relationship between people, isn't it? It's not just a descriptive notion. That sort of loving people is a good thing. And now the question is, would it be a good thing for us to want to be the instrument of good? Is that a good place? Does that concept do the kind of work we want to represent an ideal of relationship between people? Now we might have a whole set of thoughts about what kind of a concept would do it better, right? And what kind of a concept would do it better in a world like ours or in a different world? So let me give an example. Here's a place where we can see, say, real change in our concept. So let me take a look at this is from our handout from last time, which I know you've all memorized in the meantime because it's full of such cool stuff. But this is the bit I wanted to look at. This is Oliver Goldsmith writing in the 18th century about what happens when a woman makes a mistake, gives her sexual favors to a man before he actually marries her, and then finds herself pregnant. When lovely woman stoops to folly and finds too late that men betray, what charm can soothe her melancholy? What art can wash her tears away? The only art her guilt to cover, to hide her shame from every eye, to give repentance to her lover, and wring his bosom is to die. Well, so if you find yourself pregnant right back when Oliver Goldsmith was writing, and you're not married to the guy, better kill yourself. Here's T.S. Eliot. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again alone, she smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone. Quite a difference in what love, right, sort of the thought about what it was for women to love, and when Goldsmith was writing compared to when Eliot was writing. Now it's not a serious matter, then it used to be a serious matter. So the double standard for men and women's sexual behavior, which is one of a huge change, also goes along with a concept, a different change in the concept of what it is for each of them to go about loving. An ideal of relationship for one was not the same as the ideal of relationship for the other. Now that's moved into a more equitable or symmetrical position, but of course not still completely symmetrical. Like the consequences for each is different when folly is stooped to. So we want to ask this, not just what do we want the concept for, but what do we want the concept for? And in the case of knowledge, you might think that that we is very broad. Maybe it's all rational inquirers or all human beings or something like that. When we come to the question of love, it's quite different. Because, for example, right, and this is to pick up on this little passage from Svetlana Alexievich, I'm piecing together the history of domestic interior socialism. So we might think that our notion of what we want the concept of love for goes along with our conception of what the best political arrangement of our lives is. Democratic love might look very different from oligarchic love. It might look very different from socialist love, it might look very different, right? Together, these two, all of these things tend to track one another. They aren't all independent. So there are massive political aspects to thinking, right? How should we, when we ask how should we love, we're covertly asking how should we live, so that our love should be the kind of love that actually represents the true ideal of interrelationships between people. Right, so that would say, right, with Oscar Wilde, that a map of the world that didn't include utopia is not even worth glancing at. Why? Well, because when we do this, we're actually engaging in utopian thinking. We're thinking this way. In the best of all possible worlds, or in a good world for human beings to be in, what would the ideal of human relationship be in that world that has the same rough place in the lives of the people in it, that love, our concept, has in our lives? And then we'd be asking what that would be like. And then, of course, it would be like this, wouldn't it? We'd be thinking, that's really what we should be moving towards. We should be striving to already love as if we were self-legislating members of the kingdom of ends, to be Kantian about it. Right? We should already be striving to bring about the ideal by acting as if the ideal is in part already present. That's a thought about it. Let me say now, what do I think we need love for? So here, if we're thinking, okay, so I want to know what it is, and that's a hard question, but I also want to know what do we have it for. And I'm going to just put two things on the board. One has to do with power, and the other has to do with anxiety. So one of the thoughts that I think is most interesting about love is that you can't, there's no obligation on you to love anyone, and you can't be compelled to do it. One counterexample to the obligation is you might think we have an obligation to love our children. I'm going to exclude it because I think that although it's an interesting one, there's a lot to be said about why it's interesting and why it's different from the ideal of a relationship between grown-ups and adults. But it's nonetheless a very important one to keep in mind, not excluding it. But even if we do have an obligation to love our children, we can't be compelled to love them. That is, you can try, of course, to love your children, thinking that you are obliged to, and yet find out that you can't. You can simulate it, but you can't actually achieve it. Yeah, you can try your best, but if you don't love them, hey, that's bad. So love has this capacity. It's one of the things why, when we read love stories like Romeo and Juliet, they have the following structure. The power structure doesn't want this love relationship, but it's there anyway. And it turns out to have enormous capacity to overthrow tyrants, right? And that's one of the reasons why, right, there's a pressure on love to turn into something manageable. Something that, if you like, gets frittered away into a whole set of other things that can be commanded. So power is one, anxiety is the other. Our fear of being seen the way we are, right, our worries that we might not pass muster, look to find a loving eye that will see without judging, or without judging negatively, or without acting on the negative judgment, or will withdraw some of the negativity, so that we don't fear disclosure with our love. So in this case, right, love creates a sphere of intimacy at its best, a sphere of intimacy where we're much more willing to be seen as we are. In fact, that's one of the reasons why, right, when we love, we find ourselves willing to do all kinds of things that we wouldn't do otherwise. Plato even says this: if you enslaved yourself to a lover, that wouldn't be shameful. It would be shameful if you did it for someone you didn't love, but if you love somebody, doing things that otherwise you would find would be utterly degrading are not degrading at all. You can think of a few examples if you put your mind to it. Okay, so that's the thought that power and anxiety are both signal issues. We want a notion in our lives, because we're subject to power and because we're susceptible to anxiety, we want a concept that allows us to negotiate a place that's not subject to power and minimally subject to anxiety. And those are very important features of, well, then we might think, what concept would best do that, right? That's a very interesting idea. And I want to do this thing, is that love is like all interesting values, right? Love is subject to the issue that Thrasymachus raises, like Glaucon and Adeimantus raise in developing his view, and which is simulator accessibility, right? In every good can be simulated. That can be, we can have pretend lovers, pretend just people, pretend, right? Every time there's something we really care about, it's going to be in somebody's interest, right? To pretend to do it, to win us over, to get us to disclose. Think about revenge porn, right? I get you to take all your clothes off because you think I love you. I take a picture of you, maybe I do at that moment. And then later when you drop me or I hate you or whatever, I publish all this intimate stuff that you let me do as a way of taking revenge on you. That's the risk that we run. So we really do want to make sure that we're not falling into the area of the simulator. We want the real thing if we can find it. But that raises a fascinating question of how we tell simulators apart from the genuine article. So right now we've got a further anxiety because look, all this disclosure really puts you at risk, right? Even your friends, when you tell them stuff about yourself, right, you hope and you put trust in them that they won't use it against you. But who can be crueler than a lover, right? Who, knowing all these things about you, knowing your vulnerabilities, knowing what hurts you, then decides to use one of them to strike at you. We've all both been subject to it, no doubt, and done it too. So there's a worry about the simulator, just as with justice. Is this a con man, a cheat, pretending, or is this the real thing? And with the simulator comes the issue of detection. And that raises this issue, which I put on the back of the handout. Tying some of this stuff together, we can start with Mikhail Bakhtin, one of the great Russian critics, who's written about Dostoevsky, among other people. But this is from Rabelais, his book Rabelais and His World, and it's a great quote. It merits, we should, put it on the wall. Laughter purifies from dogmatism, from the intolerant and petrified. It liberates from fanaticism and pedantry, from fear and intimidation, from didacticism, naivete and illusion, from the single meaning, the single level, from sentimentality. Laughter does not permit seriousness to atrophy and to be torn away from the one being forever incomplete. It restores this ambiguous wholeness. It's a marvelous quote. You could write a book about it. It really is just absolutely right. It's why tyrants fear being laughed at, and why we need a vigorous free press filled with really great cartoonists and others to make fun of power and make them, and stop us being intimidated by it. Now let's flip over if you've got the handout. And this is from Paul Seabright's really terrific book, The Company of Strangers, A Natural History of Economic Life. A telling piece of evidence in support of the signaling theory of laughter. Here's a great philosophical question. Why do we laugh? Why is laughter contagious? So is yawning. We share it with dogs, by the way. You get your dog to yawn, you can try it. And they go, and they wonder why they're doing it. They go, what's that? It's like when they howl when they hear a certain high note, and then they wonder why the hell they were howling. So here's the signaling theory of laughter. It's a stunningly interesting theory because it really casts whole new light on the question of why we laugh. A telling piece of evidence in support of the signaling theory of laughter is the way in which across all kinds of cultures in the world, people who have made a business deal with each other tend to seal the deal by having a drink together. Drinking and alcohol notoriously affects people's judgment. In fact, alcohol is a depressant that only makes people feel all stimuli less strong, not only makes people feel all stimuli less strongly, but particularly diminishes people's sensitivity to pains, including future pains. The reason why alcohol provokes car accidents is not primarily that it slows down people's reaction times, but that it makes them reckless through diminished sensitivity to future dangers. In short, if people entered into a business relationship needing to keep a clear head in order to work out carefully how much they could afford to trust their new partners, having a drink together would be the worst possible way to seal a deal. But alcohol is also famously a disinhibitor. Most importantly, it makes people laugh. In all cultures, many business people spend evenings exchanging jokes that, to begin with, virtually nobody finds funny, but at which everyone towards the end of the evening is laughing uproariously. No doubt you've been at dinners like this. At the same time that it disables people's capacity for exercising trust wisely, alcohol is enabling people to inspire trust by simulating an excellent signal of positive affect, namely laughter, that is not under direct voluntary control. Now Seabright makes the connection to love. Sexuality is the area of human life most permeated by the ideal of willing and autonomous exchange between partners motivated by convergent desire, and yet is also the one most poisoned by the suspicion that the appearance of desire is but simulation. O pang of pangs, O grief, no grief above, is friendship counterfeiting absent love, Coleridge says, cloaking a more indirect and mercenary motive. I'm pretending to love you to get something. The indirect masquerading as the direct is likewise at money's very heart. So here's a thought, right? The issue of love is tied in various ways to the same problematic. It's how to detect the simulator is to detect signalings of love or signs of love that can't be mimicked or faked convincingly.